There is a lot of room on Earth for aquatic life. 75% of the planet is covered by water. Scientists believe that it was in water that amino acids or proteins came together millions of years ago to create the earliest forms of life on Earth. Hi, I'm Anna Z. In this show, we're going to explore life in and around the water. Welcome to the world of aquatic biomes. What defines any particular physical environment is a set of ever-changing variables. It is this specific set of variables to which plants and animals adapt that creates each of the different biomes and makes them each unique. These four variables I'm talking about are the presence or absence of light, available nutrients, temperature, and certainly moisture or the availability of water. Water affects all biomes, whether by its presence or by its absence. Water is the major factor that determines the kind of life that can survive in a given environment. An aquatic biome is an area permanently dominated by the presence of water. Aquatic biomes can be broken down into two basic types: freshwater and marine or saltwater. Freshwater biomes include rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, and freshwater wetlands. Marine biomes are oceans, seas, coral reefs, estuaries, and marine wetlands. The water we need to survive, or freshwater, is defined as water that has a salt concentration of less than 1%. While water covers most of the Earth, only 3% of the world's water is fresh. That's only 3 gallons out of every 100. But here's where it gets hard to believe. Of those 3 gallons of fresh water, 99% is frozen in glaciers or ice packs, or it flows underground in aquifers where most of the plants and animals on Earth can't get to it. If you combined all the water on Earth, starting with the oceans, ice caps, and underground aquifers, then added all the Great Lakes and Great Rivers, plus the countless smaller rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds from all around the globe, out of every 100 gallons of water on this Earth, only 8 tablespoons would be fresh surface water. But it's those few drops of fresh water that make all the difference for life on this planet. Let's take a look at some of these freshwater biomes, starting with its simplest divisions. Ponds and lakes can range in size from a few yards wide to thousands of miles across. But no matter how large or how small, the ecosystem of a pond or lake can be divided into 3 zones: the littoral zone, the limnetic zone, and the profundal zone. The littoral zone is the part of the lake or pond which is shallow, usually along the shoreline. Here, life is profuse. The sun shines in, warming the water and feeding the algae and plants. The algae and plants then provide protective cover and food for insects, crustaceans, and animals. Offshore, where the water is deeper, the surface area is called the limnetic zone. Here the water is still warmed by the sun, supporting lots of tiny, slow-moving life forms. Plant life in the form of phytoplankton and animal life in the form of zooplankton. You can bet that where there is tiny life, there is bigger life to eat it, like fish. Finally, beneath the limnetic zone is the profundal zone, the deep end. Here the water is darker and colder. The remains from the creatures above settle here after they die and are consumed by organisms called heterotrophs. Because most ponds and lakes are isolated from other bodies of water, the introduction of different species from new locations is limited or non-existent. This limits the amount of diversity that exists in these ecosystems. In the next category of freshwater aquatic biomes, you'll find streams and rivers. It's moving water that makes these different from lakes, ponds, and wetlands. The source of a river or a stream may be mountain snowmelt, runoff from rain, or the outflow of a lake. From its source, a river or stream flows until it empties into another body of water. Where the two bodies meet is called the mouth of the river or stream. It's important here to note that a lake or stream changes in character as it moves. Early on in its journey, as the water moves swiftly from the heights, it's clear and contains high levels of oxygen. But at its place of origin, a stream or river may have comparatively little plant or animal life. As the water slows and the channel widens, we begin to find great diversity of plants and animals. Finally, as it flows towards the mouth, the water picks up sediment and less light penetrates into the lower depths. Fewer plants are able to grow and there's less oxygen in the water. As you can see, the river or stream environment changes at different points along its length, so different biomes can exist in what is actually a single stream or river. The third type of freshwater aquatic biome is wetlands. You may be familiar with some names for wetlands: marshes, bogs, swamps. They're also known as fens, moors, prairie potholes, bottomland, playa lakes, and vernal pools. And their locations are just as diverse as their varied names imply. These are areas of standing water that support aquatic life and can be either freshwater or saltwater. Freshwater wetlands have the highest species diversity of all the ecosystems, and they're found in every climate and on every continent, except Antarctica. Wetlands can be found on floodplains, along rivers and streams, on the margins of lakes and ponds, and in other low-lying areas. Both above and below water, wetlands support an immense variety of plants and animals. For many creatures, living wetland plants offer a direct source of nutrition. When the vegetation dies and breaks down in the water, it forms small particles of organic material known as detritus, which feeds small insects, shellfish, and fish. Those creatures in turn feed larger fish, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals. Wetlands provide enough cover and nutrition to provide a breeding ground and nursery for species ranging from fish to waterfowl. Wetlands can also serve to control floods. They act as a sponge in times of high water. And wetlands can help conserve water by charging or adding fresh water to underlying aquifers. The species of plants and animals which saltwater marshes support are vastly different from freshwater marshes. In fact, the differences are so great that saltwater marshes have their own category. They're a type of aquatic biome known as the marine biome. In general, the species which saltwater marshes support are much like those found in other marine biomes. Shrimp, oysters, crabs, flounder, striped bass, and other species require saltwater marshes for their survival. Although greatly different from freshwater wetlands, saltwater marshes are just as remarkably productive. They provide shelter and nutrition for a wide range of species, and they're valuable in other ways as well. For instance, saltwater wetlands provide coastal areas with vital protection from erosion by the sea. As mentioned earlier, marine biomes make up the second basic type of aquatic biome. A marine biome is any area that is affected by water with a high salt content. Besides saltwater marshes, this includes coral reefs, estuaries, seas, and oceans. Okay, so what is the difference between a sea and an ocean? Well, a lot of people use the words interchangeably. A sailor is sailing the ocean or the high seas. But technically, a sea is a large body of salt water which is mostly landlocked. The Mediterranean is a good example, or the Baltic Sea. We learned earlier that a freshwater lake or pond can be divided into 3 zones. Well, the ocean can also be divided into 3 primary zones, and each of these zones has several subzones. The primary zones are the intertidal zone, which is another name for the littoral zone, the pelagic zone, and the benthic zone. Those saltwater wetlands we were talking about, well, they are a part of the littoral or intertidal zone. This is where the ocean meets the land. Due to the ever-changing tide, the intertidal zone is sometimes submerged and sometimes exposed. Few organisms can live on land that's washed with water only during high tides. But many organisms inhabit the tidal pools, which are underwater almost continuously. Offshore, you'll find what's known as the pelagic zone. Pelagic means open ocean. Of all the inhabitable environments on the Earth, the pelagic zone is the largest. From the surface of the ocean, the pelagic zone can drop to a depth of about 7 miles. Within the pelagic zone, the waters are divided according to depth. Names such as epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathypelagic, and abyssopelagic are used to describe the pelagic or open ocean zone. But there's another description of depth which perhaps is the most important. This description measures light. If light can reach down from the surface, the zone is known as photic. If not, it's called aphotic. That's important because with light there can be photosynthesis and plants can grow. Without light, there can be no plant growth and the food chain is broken. When talking about life in the water, it is sometimes helpful to think of a column starting at the bottom and rising all the way to the surface. From top to bottom, pelagic life is found anywhere in the water column. But as you go deeper, the number of species decreases. The species living at these lowest depths are dependent for their nutrition on what dies and drifts down from above. There is life at every depth of the pelagic zone, but the deeper you travel, the less light penetrates and the more difficult life is to find. Despite the lower light penetration, as you go deeper, there is not much change in water temperature. Typically, in the abyssal pelagic zone, the water temperatures range from 0 to 4 degrees centigrade or 32 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. At nearly 7 miles down, the water is only a few degrees colder than the water 100 feet deep in a place like Northern California. After the pelagic zone comes the benthic zone. The benthic zone is really the ocean bottom. Like the pelagic zone, the benthic zone is divided according to depth. First comes the sublittoral zone, just offshore. Sublittoral is often used to describe the bottom all the way out to the edge of the continental shelf. Then comes the bathyobenthic, abyssal benthic, and at the very bottom of the deepest trenches of the ocean, the hadobenthic. At the deeper divisions of the benthic, the abyssal, and the hadal, the bottom consists of sediment. Down here, so far from the weather of the surface, the water is still. The sediment is composed of the remains of life forms which rain down from above. Let's take a look at the other areas that are classified as a part of the marine biome: coral reefs, estuaries, and seas. If you're in or near the tropics, you might find coral reefs and tropical fish in the warm, shallow waters of the littoral zone. In these waters, much of what looks like plant life is actually animal. Even the coral itself is animal life. Coral is composed of the skeletons of a variety of small animals. One of these, and the most important, is the coral polyp. These animals are closely related to another creature that may be familiar, the sea anemone. As the coral polyps grow, reproduce, and die, they divide and form colonies, which remain attached to one another. Eventually, they form huge coral reefs that serve as homes for other species. An entirely different type of aquatic biome is the estuary. Estuaries are partly closed bodies of water where fresh water merges with salt water. These are incredibly productive areas, not just for marine life, but for all sorts of creatures. In water, both fresh and marine, life is resilient and pervasive. There's a huge variation in life depending on several factors: the abundance or lack of nutrients and dissolved oxygen in the water, the presence or lack of sunlight, the water temperature, and its salinity. Just as in freshwater zones, the food chain in marine zones starts with tiny, often microscopic plants and animals known as plankton. This group of plants and animals includes algae, bacteria, protozoans, and the larvae of some small animals and crustaceans. Plant plankton, called phytoplankton, nourish themselves through photosynthesis. Zooplankton then eat the phytoplankton, establishing phytoplankton as an essential link in the food chain that sustains all aquatic life. They serve us well. Phytoplankton produce 80% of the Earth's oxygen. Moving up the food chain, the diversity of life in the aquatic biome is fantastic. On colder coastlines, there is also an abundance of life. Looking like some surreal forest, kelp rises from the ocean floor all the way to the surface. Kelp provides a crucial source of food as well as a secure environment for many creatures. Water is very buoyant, making it an easy place for plants to live. Unlike trees on land, which must defy gravity to grow, aquatic plants don't need to waste energy building elaborate structures to support themselves. They simply float. Nor do aquatic plants need elaborate root systems to provide moisture and nutrients throughout their structure. Their roots simply anchor them to the ocean floor. Kelps and seaweeds are a part of a loose grouping of plants mentioned a few moments ago known as algae. Algae are found in both fresh and salt water. Well, we've covered a lot of territory in the last few minutes. We've looked at all sorts of aquatic biomes, at freshwater biomes, including those found in ponds and lakes, rivers and streams, and wetlands. We've also looked at marine biomes, from the surface and the shore of the ocean down to the deepest depths. It's hard to imagine the size and scope of all the aquatic biomes together. The next time you drive over a bridge or walk along the shore, just think for a minute of all the life on Earth that is supported by all of the aquatic biomes. All life began in the water, and all of life's survival depends on the health of our aquatic biomes.